Welcome to The Summit, a podcast focused on bringing you the knowledge and insights for industry leaders. I'm your host, Kyle Hamer, and I'm on a mission to help you exceed your potential. Today, we're here with Chris Walker. Chris, you've had a lot to say about what's wrong with marketing lately. But before we get into today's topic, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? Just give us a short 20, 30 seconds on, how your adventure got you to where you are today.
Yeah, so as quickly as possible, because I want to get into the meat for everyone. But I around 2015, before that, I had built several e-commerce companies out of my bedroom, and then moved to my first venture-funded, high ticket company, and built a demand function. It was 100% outside sales, and I built a demand function inside of that company from the ground up. During the time there, the company grew from 27 million to 46 million, had a successful IPO. The work that I was doing there drove a significant amount of net new revenue, which then led to expansion revenue and recurring revenue. And so it had a big impact. And then I looked out in the world and I realized that what I had done, I had a gift doing it on my own because the company didn't tell me what to do and the executives didn't know how to score it. And so I could just do whatever made sense. Like measuring marketing on revenue made sense to me, but a lot of companies actually don't do that. And then I looked out in the world and I was like, wow, I actually just did something that a lot of companies, one, they aren't doing the tactics. Two, they aren't measuring it appropriately. I think I got something here. And so moved into the world, started doing consulting for a couple of SaaS companies, have rapidly scaled. And now we work with 16 predominantly B2B SaaS organizations throughout North America to help them retool their demand programs to drive results.
That's pretty cool. I mean, I think there's something interesting and it's unique that I identify with your particular story in that if you had to do it for yourself to put food in your mouth or your belly for scaling up an e-commerce company, or there's some risks that you're willing to take that companies that are more established won't, but you learn lessons at a more rapid rate than, hey, I've done traditional marketing. This is the way to drive revenue.
Mm-hmm.
The long tail things, it changes your behavior and the way you think.
And here's real. I think really the key is that when you're selling that product and it costs $60 and it's your money, and you know that you only have $20 of margin in there, you know that you have to be able to get a customer for less than $20, and ideally less than $10, so you actually make some money on it. And so you're going in and you're running Amazon paid search ads, and you realize that the broad targeted search keywords are driving clicks and not driving revenue, and you cut them out. And you realize how to make an Instagram ad that is ROI positive. And most B2B marketers that execute millions of dollars in media do not have the discipline to get there.
Look, anybody that's listened to any of the clips that you post or consumes any of the content you put out, they know that the Refine Labs and Chris Walker are about aligning sales and marketing and putting marketing right up against that revenue metric, right? It's like, if marketing is not generating revenue, you're wasting your time, you're wasting your money. I recently talked to a fractional CSO, or a chief sales officer, and we were talking through what was happening with field sales because COVID's not allowing people to go out and get out. What's really happening for marketing? What's happening for these companies where I can't call into an office? People are more available, but are they really? Do we get more attention? What's happening with marketing as we're transitioning through this?
Yeah, and so it's really interesting. And this is not only in marketing, but my view on this really unfortunate situation, it is accelerating change that would have happened anyway. We're here. We probably would have taken us 3 to 5 years to get here if it wasn't for this, but all this stuff was going to happen anyway. It was just being prolonged. And so now the companies right now that hadn't taken the steps to figure out how to do this right now are incredibly vulnerable. Like, I compete with marketing agencies that have built their business on referrals and paid search and some weird things like that, and I'm winning, right? And so I think the same thing goes for companies. Is just that they have a lot of things that they need to change in marketing that they should have changed already, and hopefully they can use this time to take a step back and reevaluate how to do marketing and how to use that budget to actually drive results, instead of just doing the things that are accepted inside of their company, going to 10 trade shows because they get the leads every year, doing a ton of print brochures as sales enablement for their field sales team, running content syndication programs to get a ton of leads. Like, Those are some of the things that I see, that when things aren't as good in the company and the marketing budget starts to get scrutinized, how are you going to make the choices about what to do? I think is a really fascinating debate that a lot of people have had to go through during this time.
Well, I think they're living it and trying to understand how to reach a customer or even their end user. One of the things that I noticed that was a very interesting trend is probably late last year, late 2019, early 2020, you start hearing this mantra of email is dead, you can't use it, the channel is decaying, you can't get open rates. And then all of a sudden everybody's stuck at home. And what did every marketer do? The guys that aren't thinking creatively immediately leaned into a canned response, send them an email, hey, in this really challenging time. And literally it was cookie cutter from company to company to company. How do you...
The 6 best work from home tips, come read our blog, that has nothing to do with anything. That's what people were doing. I know.
Yeah, they were. It was wasted effort, right? So tell me what a company, say they're $25, $50 million AAR software company. Some of the people what are the things they're struggling with? Tell me. I mean, you talked a little bit about trade shows. You talked about these different things, but I can't do a trade show. Should I do an online trade show? Should I look at the virtual events? Like what are the things that we should be looking at and thinking about in this world of upheaval? What is it you're saying that got accelerated? What was going to happen anyways, but now it's just been, catapulted forward?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that immediately come to mind. The first one is that I think companies would have a huge benefit in focusing, in picking a couple different things. I noticed that not only my customers, but when I look out in the world, people are trying to do everything. And when they do everything, they spread out their budget, they spread out their resources, and they do everything mediocre. And so being able to identify with intuition or data, or ideally a combination of the two, where are the best places to spend your time and budget to get the best return, and you define return however you want. That is, I think, one key thing. The next one that I think is really interesting is that now that we've moved to an online world, you got to produce good content. And the fundamental flaw in most organizations is that the people that are creating the content do not have enough expertise inside of their buyers. They do not understand their buyers' world enough. They do not understand their customers enough in order to create content that truly brings value and cuts through the noise. And that is just in my view, a lack of understanding about how important content creation is, and therefore investing appropriately to have the right resources to do it. Those are a couple of the ones that I see right now. And then the last one is like, I think that, and this is not only right now, this is like just perpetually all the time, is that companies, I think, have a very flawed way to measure marketing.
Expand on that. What do you mean flawed way to measure marketing? I mean, we've got more tools than you can shake a stick at these days.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't talked about this right now, but I was thinking about it last night, and I was actually talking to a CMO of a pretty big MarTech company, and it got into the conversation. I was like, that's really interesting. I'd never thought about this before, but we are, I think, probably one of the most well-known for the quality of our work marketing agencies that are focused on B2B SaaS. And we don't have a single customer in the Bay Area. And I was like, I'd never put those two pieces of data together, but this is really interesting. Why is that? And then I started to think about it. And I've talked to those companies before, and the sense that I get is that their investors shove this model down their throat about MQLs, which is the whole thing that I'm against. Right. And so no wonder none of them work with us. But the flawed metric is the idea that you just get a certain amount of MQLs and then your world is okay. And those companies have the benefit of basically playing with monopoly money. Let's not sugarcoat it, because I've looked at those companies, I've audited them, their CAC paybacks are not, like the couple that I've looked at, the CAC paybacks are terrible. But because they're getting a 7 to 10 to 12x valuation on their money, they can afford a 7-year payback period, which I just find super fascinating. It creates so many flaws in an actual business in the unit economics to do it that way, where companies accept that they're getting 6,000 MQLs every month and marketing did their job and the sales team underperforms over the last 8 quarters. And somehow that's okay.
Well, it's no wonder that I think the statistic is continuing to show that CMOs are marched out to the gallows frequently, right? I think the average time a CMO is in their seat is somewhere between 27 and 32 months. I can't remember what the last study was.
Same thing with head of sales. It's even lower, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's like in the 23 to 25 month range. Like it's just a little bit over 2 years.
And if you really look deeply as to why that's happening, my feeling, too much capital creates unrealistic goals that are unattainable, which then force you to do the wrong things in order to hit goals that are unattainable, and you don't get there anyway, and then you get fired. Like it's actually so simple when you really break it down. But like, just because you didn't hit your revenue target doesn't mean it's the VP of sales fault.
Well, you look,
the company's fault. You know what I mean?
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think it's interesting that you blame it on the overinvestment or the unrealistic goals set
goal
by
setting
capital.
Process. I've watched companies set their goals. Like I've studied. I've worked inside of a lot of companies, and I've studied how they do it. And now I get a broad stroke. I get to look at 16 companies and how they put their goals together. I get to see. And
Isn't it we'll blame it on being like the Salesforce effect? I mean, really in many ways, Oracle and Salesforce were the model for what we're seeing in most Silicon Valley and SaaS companies today that base it around the MQL, right? It was like, hey, this internet thing is new. We want people to fill out a form. Early days of inbound before HubSpot picked it up and turned it into a buzzword. And we're going to have these leads called by people who are lower value sales folks. They're going to pre-qualify. So you get your sales accepted, sales qualified. We're going to push it over to an AE or, account manager, whatever you want to call them. And this high-end closer is actually going to sell the software. Fast forward 20 years.
And this is absolutely perfect to touch on, because people glorify that model, and that Salesforce had success with that model in 2004, 2007. Right? No wonder it worked so good then. The internet was barely in maturity. The social platforms didn't exist. Buyers had way little control. There was no public pricing. There was no review websites. All that stuff didn't exist. No wonder they had so much success doing that. That was the way that buyers bought. But now they continue to repeat that model more than a decade later and push it. Like, it's different for the $50 million company in 2004 to do that than the $800,000 ARR company in Silicon Valley that's doing that in 2021. Like, it's just a different world. But somehow, because that model was successful and Salesforce did it, that all of the investment community that's so far away from the actual work thinks that it still works. And on the off chance that you have a good product, like, I'm not saying that it doesn't work, right? Like, it's very clear that for the right type of company, it can work. But it's not the model that makes it work. It's how good the product is. It's how good the people are inside of it. It's how good the marketing is to support it, how much people know the brand. There's so many components. And so I think a lot of people just look at, and whether it's marketing or an outbound predictable revenue model or whatever it is, just look at it and be like, yeah, I'll just like plug this into my company and we'll be a unicorn. I talk to people that thinks that's what happened when they hire us, and it's just not the way it works.
I'm laughing because there really is this unrealistic expectation of capital, and this thought of, well, I was speaking with somebody this last week, and their CEO had come to them and said, "We just got this round raised. What are all the levers we need to pull in order to hit 30% year-over-year growth?" And my first question, which I'm sure yours was, is, well, what's your historical growth been up to this point? Well, our historical growth is somewhere around 8%. Okay, so is it 8% because this is a new market and you're making the market, so it's all leading edge or bleeding edge buyers, or is it 8% because this is a mature market and you're just capturing people as they come through on the back end. Like, where's this at? And the person I was talking to, they said, well, it doesn't matter. We have to hit 30%. I'm like, who came up with that number?
Yeah.
The investor.
Mm-hmm.
The investor was the one that wanted to see a 30% year over year growth. And it's really interesting to hear your perspective as you work with these other companies and bring in, because that model is so busted and it creates so much animosity between sales and marketing. Marketing can't really do what it's good at, and sales is always worried about whether they're gonna,
Get fired next quarter, right?
That's right.
Like really what it is. And this is, I'm making blanket statements, but there are obviously very responsible investors that invest in good companies and show them how to do the right things. I just want to put that on the record. But for the most part, like, I've worked in a lot of companies. I work with a lot of companies. I talk to a lot of companies that raise, whether you're in the Series D raising $60 million or your Series A raising $5 million, that get a number put on top of them that make them do all of the wrong things, which create short-term profile of your employees. Like, your employees don't stay for very long because the environment sucks. You're never hitting your target, so everyone feels like they're playing from behind, which hurts culture. Your marketing team is doing the wrong thing, sending a bunch of leads to sales that are not good. Sales is coming back saying these leads aren't good. Like, sales is playing behind the game, and then eventually, when they can finally hit quota, they can't wait to go and move to a different company, so they don't have to be in this environment. So no wonder you can't retain your best players. And so I just find that, like, it's been really fascinating for me to go and build my company over the past 18 months to over 2 million in revenue. And to look at how I did it with no funding, no outbound phone calls, no outbound emails, no advertising expense except for a $423 YouTube pre-roll experiment to learn so we could roll it out to our clients. And so with none of those factors, and we were able to grow at that rate, which is much faster, which is faster than most of the Series A companies that just raised $5 million
Right.
and burn it.
Well,
and the reason is because it forces you to be creative. It forces you to be smart. It forces you to do different things than what the normal people are doing. And like, I'm so proud and happy about the quality of life of all our employees. I'm super happy that the company is profitable. I'm super happy that we continue to grow. I'm super happy that we have a really strong brand and deliver good work. And we don't have to do any of the wrong things. I don't have to take on the wrong customers. Like I said no to a company today. They wanted to pay us $10,000 a month. And they told me very black and white what they wanted us to do. And I was like, no. And most executives, CEOs, head of sales don't have the discipline or the environment to say no to a customer that's going to pay them that amount of money because they have a target to hit. And so I just find it, like, really fascinating. I think that we will see an interesting turn, not tomorrow, not next year, over the next 5 or 10 years, where I personally would like to see a lot of early stage companies get to a certain level first, which forces them to build a real business, which forces them to do the right things, which forces them to make sure that the market actually wants their product. And so that's what I'd like to see.
We're in complete agreement on that. I think there are too many companies that on the back of a napkin have an idea that's a variation or a niche of a product that's already in play. They raise capital and funding, and then they spend all of their time running in circles versus actually building something that people want, is compelling, and will keep them coming back for more, right? Mm-hmm. It's better to have 5 extremely happy customers than to have 500 people who do transactions with you but they're irritated as hell, and they'll tear you down.
It really depends on what you're trying to accomplish, right? Like, I'm not trying to sell my company next year. And so if you are, like, then it really depends on your goal, because a lot of people love to if their objective is to sell the company next year and they get people on 12-month contracts, who cares whether or not they're happy, right? Like, obviously I'm not saying that everyone thinks that way, but like, that's that's what
Well,
happens. Like you
right,
get
but
driven to like if we can pump up our ARR by $5 million over the next 12 months before we sell it, we're gonna get 10x more. Whatever, we'll get a better multiple, and we'll get blah 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 blah, and it'll end up being $40 million to our investors and the people that have stock in the company.
look, and what's fantastic to hear you say, and actually it's because I've lived it. It's fantastic to hear you say that because you're 100% right. Depending on what the executives and the leaders want to accomplish, and if it's selling your company, you're going to make short-sighted decisions that are going to have long-term effects that you're not going to be able to live down. And
It's
as an
interesting because once you sell it, it's no longer your problem, right?
that,
Like
that's exactly
I've actually watched. I know executives that have sold companies for $500 million, and those companies have gone directly over in the trash over the next 5 years because they didn't invest anything in product. They pumped up all the metrics. They stripped out a bunch of different things to bump up margins, and then the big acquirer comes in and then gets screwed. And I mean,
well, and to
that
that,
happens a
even to
lot.
that end, all the time, way too much, and sometimes
It's actually
it's as
the
simple
acquirer's
as
fault if you think about it. It's
right,
actually
because
the
they didn't do their
buyer's
due
fault.
diligence. Yeah, well, they didn't fully appreciate what it was that they were procuring. Um, so in this transition phase, who's doing it well? Like, who do you think out there, B2B, who's doing a really good job of having high EQ, creating good content, making sure that they're focused, and from what you can at least see, you're seeing what looks to and appears to be profitable results or happy salespeople, right? Fat and happy
hmm
salespeople is a sign of good marketing.
Um, I can't put my finger on anyone particular. I've been shouting out this company called Rippling lately. Very high profile HR type of software. Mainly just because I think the executions that they've been doing are smart. Um, they raised a ton of money. They raised like $200 million. So like they're kind of like going all out here. And I'm not sure that's something that I recommend for everyone, but like their um, paid social execution has been very strong, which I think is honestly like the best place that you can market right now, as long as you know how to do it well. And I think there's a lot of people that don't do it well. And then the second piece is that like, if you don't know how to measure paid Facebook or paid LinkedIn, then you aren't going to keep spending on it because you don't know how to measure it. And I've just over time, I've gone and spent $50,000 in Facebook and watch what happens in the CRM. And yeah, there's no attribution, but I know what's going on. And then I take the 50 and move it to 100, and I see what's happening in the CRM, and it goes up to more. And so like, I think because people need direct attribution to everything, they end up doing the things that are the most intent based and most measurable. And I talk about that a lot. Like that's what people do. And I think it's just it's a lack of understanding how people actually buy products and a lack of common sense.
Somebody once told me that it's not B2B or B2C, it's H to H. That all marketing and all sales is done human to human. It doesn't matter what the interface is or at what scale it is. At some point, that transaction, that conversation, that content comes down to one human communicating something to another human in
Mm-hmm.
order to move the sale forward or backwards. When you look at, you talked about the three things: focus, good content, and a way to measure marketing. Where are the areas that you think companies should be focusing or starting to divert attention to understand what's next for them? Because I mean, a lot of people are putting together their 2021 budgets and plans at this point.
Mm-hmm. I've been talking about this for a while. I've seen very few people take me up on it. The ones that have, whether taken me up on it on my advice or done it without knowing my advice, but just because they were intuitively thought it was smart, are hiring or somehow acquiring or whatever you need to do 2 or 3 subject matter experts that are focused on creating content that helps your customers. Like that's it. The reason that my company's been able to grow is because I am an expert in the things that the CMOs that I'm trying to sell to care about. And the reason that It's very successful in the cybersecurity company that I talked to and had on my podcast last week, is because they have two people that were CISOs inside of companies. And now all they do is scan the dark web, find insights, produce content that CISOs want, which then creates a lot of awareness and traffic to their website and drives more inbound results. And so I guess there's really two components here. It's one, you need people that actually know what they're talking about and can speak at a peer or even a thought leadership level to those buyers. The second thing is that you need to know what you're trying to do. And so like a lot of people that create content, they say that they're creating content, but they're mainly doing it so they can get your email address and sell something to you. And so it's not only about who's doing it and what you're producing, it's also about what you're expecting out of it. Because I think a lot of companies have ruined content marketing, for lack of a better term, based on how they do it, which is not a bad thing for everyone listening here. The fact that so many companies suck at it gives you a real opportunity to stand out. I think that is a real recommendation. I've seen four or five companies, a couple that we work with directly, do that and have a ton of success. Put their CEO on, the CEO that is an expert in whatever they do, onto 4 podcasts that are top in their industry, and just let them talk about how they would do something different for those audiences. Not pitching the product, not asking someone for a demo, not asking for their email address, not seeing if they'll set up a meeting with their SDR, just providing information that helps people. And so I think that's one. If you got me back on the question, I could think about what the next one would be. But I mean, the take home here, especially where we are right now, is that people are on all these platforms. For B2B, there's a lot of people on LinkedIn. We use paid to get to a lot of people on Facebook and Instagram. Wouldn't recommend that as an organic strategy right now. And then there's podcast, which is in my view, one of the most undervalued channels out there. Like and I won't go into deep detail, but on Tuesday night, I ranted for like 9 minutes on a podcast about how all of the different benefits that are outside of just having your podcast on Spotify, all the different benefits of doing it. And so people can reference that if they want, but I think that's a super undervalued channel. Again, people don't do it because they don't know how to measure it. No wonder they don't do it. Like if you really break it down, marketing comes down to performance and brand. And companies, because of all of the different things that happen inside of their organization, they just do 100% performance marketing, AKA sales.
What's interesting about that is if you go back to the 2004 to 2007 paradigm where we were talking about, the Salesforce effect, right? Mm-hmm. In these models, one of the big cohorts, or not even cohorts, but pillars for marketing at that time was creating a brand, creating a lasting brand, creating something that would leave an impression. And for the organizations like Salesforce, they used their business model, their MQLs, their outbound efforts at that time to create brand. That's shifted. It's shifted because people are more interested in being educated. They want to learn something. They want to know what you know, and that they can trust you because your knowledge is at, like, to your point of the SME. I just think that's really, really wise. When one of my last organizations, we started putting subject matter experts in front of cameras and doing tips and tricks. And when they were talking through how people were preparing for doing their job, as they started creating content, the value not only went up, but our understanding inside the product and the way that the company behaved changed dramatically, because now you had these subject matter experts that were creating things, and you had something that the rest of the company was trying to live up to. So I think that's really wise to provide that.
Just the tactics on brand, quote unquote, it ultimately comes down to, can you make a connection with someone, right? And that was basically what it was. And so if you look back in the 2004-07 timeframe, the ways that you made connection was a great relationship with your sales rep, going to the booth and seeing the new product because you couldn't see it anywhere else, getting a piece of mail. Like, there's probably a couple other ones that I'm leaving out here, but those are some major ones about the opportunities to to create brand, and then ultimately getting someone into the product where they can see it, get the value, and then communicate the brand to others through word of mouth, which is by far the most effective channel out there is, right? And so when you look at it now, companies still do all of those different things, while the attention about how you would actually do that mainly focused on, because the buyer has more control through all the different availability of information, they have way more control over their process. They don't need to go to your booth and see your new product anymore. They don't need your sales rep to call them to get pricing. And so because of those things have moved, people and the buyer consumption of information has changed. There are different ways that we need to do the same job to build the brand, to get people into the product, to create the word of mouth, right? And I think companies have just been slow to adapt to those things. And I don't expect this is going to be like people are going to listen to my podcast and then change their whole marketing measurement. Like that's not going to happen. But I do just think that it comes down to one being stuck in a certain way of doing it. And I talk about this a lot, over time, as you keep growing your company, you get more and more stuck. It's no wonder companies don't, shift their go-to-market model when they have 95 SDRs. It's hard.
Well, yeah, because there's not only sometimes I think it's about ego, right? And admitting, well, maybe that wasn't the best decision, and then trying to figure out how to navigate out of it. There's always some of that plays into it. But the thing that I think is really interesting, and it's a question that I don't know as we ask often enough, is before you could measure performance at a one-to-one level or do the paid spend to try and, tie it all out. How did companies grow? What was it they spent money on? And how, if you ask yourself that question at a core, you realize that it's the exact same. The game's the same, just played on a different field. Mm-hmm. It's 100% about brand, awareness. Your content, all the different pieces have to be valuable, but you're creating something that people want to be a part of. Mm-hmm. Whether it's a new energy company or SpaceX going to send people to the moon. Like it doesn't matter what the company's product or service is. There's somebody out there that cares about it. Do they know you? Can they find you? And is the stuff that you're educating them with or creating awareness with resonating with them? And I think that there's a lot of wisdom in what you're sharing.
It's really, for lack of a better term, I think it's really unfortunate, the situation that a lot of marketers get put into companies. Like I have my live Q&A on Tuesday nights. We've been doing it for 6 months every week, 26 episodes. And I get questions from people, 10, 20 questions per episode. So a lot of questions have been built up. And a lot of them ultimately come back to, how do I convince our CEO to do X? How do I change our measurement away from MQLs? How do I do, it all comes back to, how do I change the way that the people above me that actually make the decisions about how I do my job, how do I change that? And the answer that I usually give is, you go find someone else that already understands the thesis. It really is the easiest way. And I think it's really, like, to go back to the unfortunate point, I think it's tough because like these executives have come up through the era where the predictable revenue model worked a lot better than it does today. And then they were brainwashed through the early 2010s about how you need to measure everything, and are just so far away from the actual like work and buyer that they haven't realized how things have been shifting. And so now marketers get in and they want to do a podcast and they want to post organic true content marketing on LinkedIn, not spam DMs and other shit that you can measure, putting a link in your post with a UTM tag on it. Like, so not doing those things, like doing true marketing. They can't do any of those things because the executive comes back and says, you've been posting on LinkedIn for, 6 months now. I see that you've gotten 800 more followers, but how many leads did I get? And I think it's just really not smart.
It's short-term investment versus long-term investment, right? I mean, there's always going to be some components you're going to need to try and drive the revenue right now, whether it's, hey, I got to hustle and get a contract to do something today to get started. You've got to have something to start the flywheel. But once you start the flywheel, you're now got to start placing long-term bets. And too many companies aren't betting long-term.
It's it's not even, in my view, like I do this at the $50 million company, and with no extra budget, no extra people, just literally changing the things that they do, are able to impact their demo requests by 4 or 5x, impact their sales qualified opportunities per month by 3 to 4x, literally by just doing things that are more customer centric, by not spending $70,000 a month on LinkedIn getting ebooks and then having your SDRs chase them around, by not buying broad match AdWords terms and driving them into a squeeze landing page for an ebook download so that you can call them 5 minutes afterwards. Like, by not doing those things and doing things that actually help your customer, by showing them the things that they can accomplish with your product, by showing them other companies that have had similar successes, by showing them the problems that your product can solve that they might have, and doing it in an effective, communicating that in an effective way. Like, it's not that hard. I don't know what to say, but like I lose customers at the same time by doing that, because they want 9,000 MQLs and they're only getting 300 demo requests. Even though they will definitely get more customers on the 300 demo requests than the 9,000 MQLs. And but they've been trained to only look at that, the leading metric, not the lagging one. And during that period of uncertainty where you have a 90-day sales cycle and you've gone 3 months without 9,000 MQLs and you haven't seen the funnel metrics play out, and you don't understand the actual revenue model enough to know what's happening at the leading end of the metrics and see how they're progressing to SQOs and looking at the conversion rates. If you haven't seen it before, you're kind of sitting there as the VP of demand and being like, I'm out. And I'm comfortable with that. Like, the results speak for themselves. The people that don't want to do it, I have no interest in trying to convince anyone to do anything that they don't want to do.
You know, so I think if we had some takeaways here from today's chat, because I think you and I could talk about this stuff till the cows come home.
Literally talk until 8 p.m. tonight. I'm positive.
I guarantee that. But the takeaways for people navigating is just like, let's get back to the basics. Focus on what's most important, right? Make sure what you're providing folks is good content and it's of value to them. So, you know, don't go hire Pee Wee Herman to talk about engineering. It's probably not going to go well.
And you create the content 100. Sorry to interrupt you, but
you create the
content 100% to help them. 0% about how you're going to get a sale out of it. And people can feel it, even if you're 1% of the way of trying to, like, you put the button at the bottom of your content, which is, oh, by the way, if you want to talk, here's a way to book a meeting. Like, just leave it out. Just like, I don't know how to communicate that in a more direct way, but like the sales intent ruins the quality of the content over time.
Who knew we would over engineer things as marketers? And then the last thing that you said, which I think is really interesting, is revisit the way that you're measuring marketing and success and failure, right? Because what's successful, what's right by whatever the model is that you're working may not actually be successful for what your ultimate goal is. And so figuring out that formula that works, or that the comfort level, to your point, you found that, you found your zen with what you're comfortable doing and where you're comfortable, the space you're comfortable functioning in. Other marketers that are listening, or sales guys that are listening, they've got to find that space for themselves.
Yeah. And I've created the structure here and the relationships that I have with the customers, that I get to do a bunch of new things every day, like buying podcast ads for this company and running TikTok ads for another company, and things that marketers that are working in-house would never do. And so, yeah, I do have a core model that works. And at some point in time, the core model won't work as well as it does right now. I know that Facebook ads do not work as well right now than they did in 2015, because I ran them in 2015. Just like the executives that are running the predictable revenue model probably know, if they really look deep, that it worked better in 2009 than it does today, right? And so over time, at some point, I won't want to buy Facebook ads anymore, and I'll need to know something else to do. And so I'm on the way to trying to figure those things out. And other people that claim to do similar things to what I do are going to run Google ads no matter what. even if the ROI is bad. A company comes to you and says, we want to spend $100,000 in Google ads, and we're okay if you take 10% of that fee, so you'll make $10,000 a month. And then if you actually went in there and you looked at the keywords and you said, okay, but actually you should only be spending $40,000 a month. No agency is going to tell you that, because their fee would go from $10,000 a month to $4,000 a month. And so there's some really interesting, if you look deeply about those types of relationships where it's a single channel. I think that one of the benefits of what we do is that because we manage the entire digital media budget, like I've had companies that are like, we want to spend $200,000 a month, and I'm like, you should only be spending 120. You decide if you want me to how you want me to do with the other 80,000, but like, I know that you should only be spending 120, and most people can't do that because of things that are set up. So I don't know how I got on that little tangent. Sorry to interrupt your closure. I feel like that was kind of a way to try and like reopen this. We could keep going, but we can close it out.
No, look, Chris, I appreciate you being on the show today. As always, it's a blast to chat with you, to talk what you call common sense marketing. And I think it's just business 101, right? You find something that works, you work it until it doesn't work anymore. But while you're doing it, you're an avid learner of other things that are out there, always looking for that next advantage. And I think that there's something very cutting edge about this conversation, and yet it seems so incredibly basic. But thanks for being on and sharing with the
Thanks, Kyle.
audience.
Always great to be hanging out with you, man.